From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Well, folks. Good morning. Happy Tuesday, December 14, 2021. Just 10 short days until Santa starts his journey, handing out gifts to all the young kids around the globe. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I've got a very special guest on today's show. Rosa Smothers is the Senior VP of Cyber Operations over at Nova4. Rosa, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm caffeinating.
Yeah, we're about to do a coffee cup cheers here in just a moment. I've got my double espresso ready to go. Folks, we're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Good morning to everyone tuning in this morning. What are you drinking? What are you having for this Tuesday? Because I know a lot of us are exhausted after a very busy weekend where we're going to be talking about Log4J today, a few updates from Chrome and Apple, and the reason Rosa's here, NSO. We're going to talk about offensive cyber weapons and so much more. So make sure you tune in and stay tuned for the entire episode today. It's going to be a good one, I absolutely promise. Shout out to Nova4 for their support of the show. Their support of the show would not be possible. You can see more about Nova4 in the show notes. Good morning to Eddie from Big D, Dallas, Texas. Top of the morning to Joel from Eastern North Carolina, and the many more folks that are tuning in as we get started on today's show. Before we do that, though, your caffeine, my double espresso. I love an espresso in the morning. This is my fourth day.
All right. Well, I'm on my second Diet Mountain Dew, but I have reserve dews here at my desk as well.
Oh, wow.
The caffeine molecule is right there with water as importance on the planet. So
they now have Mountain Dew Zero.
You know, I've tried that. The bouquet of the Zero is not quite what I am looking for. I still prefer the overall scent of the classic. But to me, it's like the new Coke of the 21st century. So no.
Yeah, old Coke all the way through, folks. Coffee cup cheers, Rosa. Your Mountain Dew, my double espresso.
Cheers to you, sir.
Cheers. All right, let's get right into Log4J here. It's been keeping everyone very, very, very busy over the weekend. So let's go right on it. Well, first of all, CISA is front and center on this one, which is very, very different from previously, where CISA would withhold comment, hide away, and kind of disappear from the conversation. This time, CISA is front and center with Director Easterly doing what a leader should be doing in a position of leadership when it comes to cyber, going everywhere and talking about this and explaining the ramifications on every single major media outlet in order to help CISOs deliver the message to the board, to the executive committee, so that people don't take this lightly at all. Director Easterly was on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, all of that yesterday, talking about this, with the vulnerability saying is one of the most serious that I've seen in my entire career, if not the most serious. For those who don't know Director Easterly, she is probably 20 some odd years in security, formerly of NSA and so many great organizations. So her team goes on to say that they expect this vulnerability to be widely exploited by sophisticated actors, and we've got a limited amount of time to take the necessary steps in order to reduce the likelihood of damage, according to Director Easterly. Jay Gazalet, of CISA's Vulnerability Management Office, warns that hundreds of devices are likely to be affected. This remotely exploitable flaw is present in hundreds of major enterprise products like Oracle, Cisco, Red Hat, IBM, VMware, and Splunk, and also AWS, Azure, as well as security appliances and developer tools. Google Cloud is still investigating. Plenty more on that. The Apache Foundation has released version 2.15.0 to update the flaw, but you've got to update the flaw, and then you've got to update your software, and then you've got to move on. There is a list of vulnerable vendors, folks. You can see that all the links are in the show notes. I don't really want to get stuck too much on this. I do want to point out one thing before I ask Rosa here. Industrial organizations are already being targeted with the Log4 shell or Log4j attacks. ICS firm Dragos reported on Monday that it's observed both attempt and successful exploitation of the vulnerability. It's already coordinated the takedown of malicious domains used in the attack. Some of the giants have reported that they all have vulnerabilities. Siemens confirmed that 17 of its products are affected. Schneider Electric also released an advisory. It's working to see which of its products are affected as well. Inductive Automation, which provides SCADA software, said the customer that it has conducted a full audit and said they were not impacted, as well as many more that are still doing it too. So keep your eyes out for that. Good morning to Marcia from beautiful, lovely Houston, Texas. Rosa, what's your take on Log4j? What would you be doing as a VP of Cyber Operations? What have you been doing?
I think the number one thing that always concerns me, and as we were saying kind of before we went live, is when I think about especially when it comes to SCADA and industrial control systems, the ubiquity of this particular vulnerability is mind-boggling, because especially for organizations that have been bought and sold. So unfortunately, there are a lot of companies out there that don't have a 100% inventory of their ecosystem, or they're running such old software because it would cost so much and the risk is so high to replace that software. So even patching it is such a risk. So this is why an occasion like this, where it is, like I said, so ubiquitous and so dangerous, is sort of the ultimate in worst case scenarios. So yeah, I'd be making sure that we had our inventory first and foremost, and then working through the process from there. But it's a very like you say, it's an order of operations issue. Addressing the vulnerability, addressing the operating system, but making sure that you even know the XP box, the 2010 box, whatever is out there on the network, that it needs to be addressed in the first place. Those are the things that concern me.
Yeah, this is, one thing you can't fall asleep on here, folks, is the fact that if there's still companies out there with this vulnerability who don't have a patch, and you're using these tools day to day, few mitigations that people should be doing is one, limit external internet facing of those applications. If you need to talk to the board, talk to the executive committee, it's not ideal, but could we block incoming traffic to some of these tools from the internet for the time being? Could we use our firewall or WAF products to really limit some of the IOCs and TTPs that we're already seeing? MITRE has a great write-up on that as well, folks, and you can see that all in the show notes today. The Swiss government has something that was I found to be very, very helpful yesterday as well. CISA does, and CISA's constantly updating. Let me tell you something. Since CISA's inception, Rosa, I have never been more impressed with an agency.
Right. They're the crown jewel of DHS, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, like you say, Director Easterly is practicing great leadership. I think the more that she's in the press and advocating and talking about this, it's going to help the CISOs and people at the tech level to advocate for spending if they need money to remediate some of these issues. So the kind of her PR surge on this is hopefully going to help everybody else, when it comes to remediation process.
Yeah, this is so critical. So critical, which kind of leads us to two of the biggest companies in the world. Apple and Google have released patches for their respective devices. Part of it is not Log4Shell. These patches obviously are part of a patch cycle, and they're preordained, pre-administered, but you can bet that some of them do address some of this as well with last-minute changes. One, Apple has issued a new update that patches the remote jailbroken exploit for iPhones. This is for iOS, macOS, tvOS, and watchOS. multiple vulnerabilities, including the remote jailbreak exploit chain, as well as the numerous critical issues in the kernel and Safari web browser that were demonstrated at the Tianfu Cup held in China 2 months ago. Track this. There's a bunch of CVEs here, folks. You can see this here again. With respect to time, you guys can go. Links are all in the show notes. Go check them out. And check out this Apple vulnerability. The patch is there. Make sure you update your devices, your computers, all of that good stuff. Also, Google 96 update patches. Wow, 96.
Wow.
Including exploited zero-day vulnerabilities. So make sure you patch your Google devices as well. And that is your Chrome browser. If you are using it, make sure you get it patched as soon as humanly possible.
And guys, also, you've got friends and family and senior citizens in your life that might be using certain, Chrome browser, whatever. Let them know too, because they're not going to know who Jen Easterly is, and they're not going to understand it when they see it on the news. So, push that knowledge, not just internally in your company, but to your friends and family also, because they're also vulnerable, right?
Yep, absolutely. Log4j, according to Joel, seems like the perfect ransom as a service potential. It's not doesn't look like perfect. It is the perfect ransomware as potentially you can get in, you can get persistence. You can think of SolarWinds, think of Equifax, and then put those two on steroids, give them a bunch of zombie-like mutations, and let them go into the population. That's what this is. Christiana says FYI. So yeah, that is as well. Thank you, Christiana. Let's get to the topic of the hour. Rosa, you and I, when we first got together, we're like, what? I really want to talk about an NSO. NSO's in trouble. Serious trouble. In fact, it's considering closing its Pegasus unit altogether. There's rumors of an American private equity firm that's looking to buy Pegasus. And you and I kind of don't see eye to eye on this, which I appreciate. Why are we going after the weapon and not the user?
Or both. Well, I think so. In this case, the user, I'll shift that a little bit and I'll say the customer, at least based on all the media reporting, have been pretty much relegated to countries. So,
right.
Part of that is having the political will to do something about that. We have we have different international agreements, we have treaties, we have the willingness to regulate internationally nuclear weapons. We need to talk about, the evolution of the international commercial surveillance industry and the lack of regulation or international treaties as it relates to the software, the transport of the software, and those end users. But, the reality is this is one in an ongoing series of diplomatic issues. But my gosh, this was utilized against Khashoggi, and to very little blowback to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I'm just not optimistic in that regard, but I'm certainly, there needs to be international agreement that these are their own form of cyber weapons of mass destruction, and they need to be regulated, because the privatization of this sort of thing isn't just limited to nation states. If you're a well-funded individual, presumably, you could also pursue utilization of a tool like this. So it's, especially for such a unique tool that Pegasus is or was, because obviously those 3 0 days are no longer in existence. The rarity of it, kind of like what we're talking about with this, this current vulnerability, the rarity of it and the ease of exploitation, 0 or 1 click, that's the danger and the mass deployment capability of it as well. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I totally, kind of understand your point of view. I'm more on the I guess I'm more on the side of this is private enterprise. So private enterprise with government approval. Israel approved the sale of this product to all these different nations. NSO wasn't running a black market shop selling this out of the back of a van, right? Somewhere they were going through all the respectable and accepted ways to sell these types of softwares out there. How you use it is at the intention of that. I feel like this is a Citizens Lab hit piece on NSO and just this entire industry. Number one, I think the other aspect of it is it's why not go after, like I said, the governments who are using this, right? So if Saudi Arabia misused this, sanction them. God forbid we sanction Saudi Arabia, right? Or we kind of take up an agreement with them that, hey, if you're going to buy these arms, you've got to sign a commitment to not use them one way or another. What we've done here is what's been done here is the U.S. government's turned and went after a private organization and also went over with an ally where Israel has now limited the export of cyber security products from 102 nations to only 37, which severely impacts how Israeli cybersecurity companies can compete in the global marketplace when it comes to cybersecurity. I kind of find it to be a bit of an overreach because we don't want to pay the political capital, so we're going after private enterprise. Today it's NSO. Tomorrow it could be any one of our companies that they deem is you're teaching awareness too well, and it's really hindering our ability to conduct effective cyber operations. So we're going to have to get you to stop.
I guess I could see it either way. I mean, I don't think that NSO Group was 1000% transparent and honest about how some of their operations were conducted. They talked about how there was initial vetting, then there was an internal ethics review, and then, there was a contract that, hey, if they pursued people and there were very strict definitions of what a terrorist was or things like that, then by golly, they'll go in and remove that. After seeing on numerous occasions that wasn't the case, and there was also a claim that they would be able to go into the server and look at the logs and see who was being targeted, and based upon that, they would end it. Well, what do you mean end it? You're going to go into the Mabahith headquarters and just pull the software out? It doesn't work like that. So I've seen a lot of statements by the company that don't quite make 100% sense to me. So I'm a bit dubious about some of their claims. But it wasn't, the Biden administration didn't just blacklist NSO Group. There was another company, Israeli company called Kandaroo, I think it was, right. That it's malware that's theorized to, focus on desktop operating systems. So presumably Windows, Mac, maybe Chrome OS, some things like that. But again, I think it's to use, we're both nerds, with great power comes great responsibility. It is the weaponization of software for private industry. And for NSO Group, I do think, it kind of reminded me in a way of SolarWinds. There was so much opportunity, quote unquote, with having that sort of tool and exploit available to them. And in my view, there was so much overreach. I mean, the idea with doing sneaky things is to not get caught. And they went everywhere. So there was a lot of money to be made. With that sort of proliferation of a tool, it's inevitable that it's going to be discovered.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that's unique about Pegasus is it attacked what we seem to look at as being the most secure operating system, which was Apple. But again, I'm going to go right.
Well, I mean, there was an Android and BlackBerry version of the software, to be clear, but it was newsworthy in that it was so specific to iOS that there were 3 vulnerabilities that were utilized in, an order of operations fashion to leverage the 0 or 1 click, vulnerability or entree.
So we'll take this for what it is. Here's where I see this, and I will say the following: going after NSO group to me is the ultimate hypocrisy of bad governance internationally over over offensive cyber capabilities, because we don't go after. When Assad was chemically bombing the people of Syria, we didn't go after the manufacturer of that company that sold him those weapons, because it was Russians and Chinese that did that, as well as Iranian weaponry. But we've time and time again, I feel like we've looked away from stuff like this, and now we're kind of looking at NSO. And I think one of the things that I saw in there was that U.S. diplomats in Uganda had Pegasus used against them, and that's kind of what really angered the DOJ and many others. But the fact that an American private equity company is looking at us, NSO Group and Pegasus, makes me feel like a lot of this is just fluff. It's just to kind of quiet the storm, and then in a year or two we'll see a new name for Pegasus and something else in the marketplace. And I don't know that there is a global want for a treaty. I think we as citizens, as journalists, as people who seek freedom to be away from surveillance, we want to have that treaty in place. But I feel like governments are less likely to go for it simply because they all use these types of tools. They all take advantage of them. So why would they ever sign a document on this? Because, Jamal Khashoggi, who was the Washington Post journalist who was allegedly, can we say allegedly still, even though over the weekend one of his perpetrators was arrested, but there's been no convictions yet, allegedly was murdered and made in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. He was Pegasus was found on his device, and that's what led the hit squad to target him. So I see both points to this argument, but I still think this is cowardly diplomatics at best.
Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides of the issue, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think there's also the difference, when you're talking about governments, there's a difference between surveillance, i.e. of Khashoggi and others. His wife's phone was also infected, and intelligence collection. One is state-sponsored for the point of informing, or it should be when it's done right, it's done ethically, of informing decision makers, policy makers, so they can make the right and best and most secure decisions for their country, their constituency, versus surveillance, where again, when it's journalists, when it's human rights activists, when it's dissidents, that's another side of the coin. And that's where the question of ethical behavior, ethics, as it relates to collection of information, deployment of software enabling vulnerabilities, that's where that comes into play. And I'm not a philosopher, but I've certainly worked with a lot of lawyers in the cyber operations space. And there are a lot of distinctions when it comes down to surveillance versus collection.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, by the way, Rosa. An absolutely great distinction, which is surveillance versus actual, intelligence collections. And I think Pegasus was designed for the first, but used for the latter.
And I should clarify, because I don't think we've mentioned it before. So I worked at the CIA for over a decade. I worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I did a rotation with the National Security Agency. So when I say I've worked with a lot of lawyers on these sorts of issues and understand the distinction between surveillance and intelligence collection, I mean that from my very heart and soul. So there is a distinction. There's ethical and legal distinctions, between that. So I think that's why when we're talking about government versus private sector, it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Rosa, I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. We can definitely have like a full episode having a discussion around this. I feel like it's worthy of it. So we may end up having to do something next month as we see how things develop here with NSO Group and some of the other stuff. I'm waiting to see Citizen Lab do the same thing for other offensive cyber weaponry. I have yet to see them do anything outside of just chase NSO. So interested to see the balance here, or if this was just a hit job.
I don't know. I mean, I'm under the impression Citizens Lab has researched more than NSO Group, but I can't speak to them specifically, so I'll have to take your word for it until I look into it. So,
yeah. Awesome. Folks, that's it for our practitioner brief here today. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. with a lot more. By the way, after this episode on our audio podcast and on YouTube, you can catch a special interview I had with Demi Ben-Ari, the CTO and co-founder over at Panorays, on what you can do to mitigate Log4J. A really cool 5 minutes. Go check that out as well. So if you're listening on our podcast platform, you're about to hear that interview right now. And if you're watching us live, go check out our YouTube channel. In about an hour, you'll see it there as well. For everyone else, thank you, Rosa. Thank you to our friends over at KnowBe4. Thank you for all of you awesome people who have been watching us here. And we'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, great rest of your day and stay cyber safe.
Have a great day.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.